Alright guys, it's half anniversary in Jujutsu Kaisen Phantom Break, so let's make a tier list for the characters in this game. Now, I want to start off with a bit of context on how to actually read this tier list, by the way, because if you actually take a look at the labels for my tiers, you can see it's quite different to the normal, S tier, A tier, B tier, etc. Because to me, those are just letters, they don't really mean anything, whereas I actually want to give a bit of a descriptive label to the type of characters in that tier. So that's kind of why instead what I've done is I have labeled the role of the characters in that tier, because a lot of time the characters in this game, they normally have one or two purposes, and that's normally the role they'll be playing in. And it's just not fair for you to compare characters from one role to another role when they do complete different things, right? Because it's kind of like comparing apples to oranges. It just doesn't make sense. And that's kind of why I have decided to label for my tiers this way. However, at the same time, certain roles will just be played a lot more often than the other roles. So, for example, supporters in general are going to be used a lot more universally than DPS, because supporters can be used regardless of the stage, regardless of what color is the enemy, etc. Whereas for the DPS, you may need to actually change that up all the time depending on what color the enemy is actually weak against, etc. So that's why supporters are a bit more universal and a lot more frequently used. That's why I have them at higher tier than DPS. And similarly, for example, if you actually take a look at the DPS tier, those are normally the cases when you have enough damage, you can just burst down the stage. That's a lot more quicker, a lot more efficient than try to stall for 40 turns to be a stage. So that's kind of why DPS is going to be at a higher stage than the stall team, even though they are completely different roles. So you can kind of like read my tier list in both directions. And the way I have done this hopefully can tell you guys not only in terms of like, who do you actually want to put resources in, because they are most widely used and also the best of their tier, but also give you guys some insights on how would you actually be playing those characters when it comes to team building. Okay, so that's kind of the basic content for my tier list. Let's now go straight into the tiers themselves. Top of the tier, they're the GOAT, greatest of all times. It's quite obvious. It's Domain Gold and Sukuna. I think everyone are in consensus on this one. Some people would say Domain Gojo is better than Sukuna purely because he's a supporter and therefore he's more universal. And that's kind of why I also put him in front of Sukuna as well. But on this note, I will also want to point out that Sukuna can be used in off-color teams as well, even though he is a blue DPS, because a lot of the damage he does is actually from damage over time, which doesn't really get impacted by color weakness. And as a proof of this, if you guys haven't seen it already, I did post a video last week on how Sukuna can beat all five of the limited time tower for this month, even for the off-color one. So that's just once again shows that despite the fact that Sukuna is positioned as a blue DPS, he totally works in off-color teams. And as a result, just like Domain Gojo, if you have him, you would normally put him into your team regardless of the stage. And that's kind of why they are just in a tier by themselves, because they're just like universally used all the time. Also on this note, I would like to say that Sukuna's banner is still out right now. I know the main Gojo already went away, but Sukuna's banner is still out right now. So if you're actually new to the game, or if you got completely shafted and you don't actually have either of them, highly recommend you guys to reroll now to at least guarantee Sukuna. Like I will say that even if you have a stack account with like max dupe standard banner characters, it doesn't really matter. Like the value of one Sukuna to me is a lot higher than standard banner character, even if they're full duped, because in long term you can always max dupe your standard banner character, whereas Sukuna limited character, now it's the chance to get it, and we all know how bad is the pity in this game. Rerolling right now for Sukuna is going to be your best chance of getting him, okay? So definitely do this if you do not have either of those limited character on your account right now. And also on the note of rerolling, I'm going to be cheeky because I do have a personal link for downloading this game. So I will share that in, or I will pin that in the comment section below. So I'll be very grateful if you guys are either new or rerolling or want to install this game on brand new device, etc. Very grateful if you guys can actually download it from my link just to show a bit of support. Okay, so that's kind of the first tip is the goals, undisputed. All right, everyone should be in consensus there. Next tip, I'll have the defensive supporters. So normally, like I said, normally your first strat on trying to beat down a stage is going to be try to burst it down with a traditional DPS. And in order to do that, a lot of time you need to have supporters because all of those supporters that I have here, they tend to be able to give more than double the amount of buff to you or amount of the damage increase to you. So that basically having supporters on your team is going to be a lot more versatile than bringing two DPS. As a result, supporters they would be played all the times when you are trying to burst down stage. Now, when it comes to supporting your characters or supporting DPS, what you guys need to realize, in case you don't know already, all of the buff and debuff in this game fall into three different categories. I already make a very in-depth guide on how to do this, and I will link that in the video description below as well, in case you guys don't know or forgot about it. But basically, the three different types is going to be damage dealt, increase or debuff, which is basically the one Domain Gojo have, and then you have the likes of curse technique or taijutsu technique increase, or curse technique or taijutsu technique debuff. So basically those three are considered three separate category of supporting skill, and as a result they will be multiplying to each other, rather than if you actually bring two character of the same group, what you'll be doing is addition, which is obviously not as good as multiplication. And as a result, because of how good Domain Gojo is already in the group he is in, as a result, what I have done is I have separated out the supporters in this game into two tiers. One is going to be the curse technique buffers and also debuffers because they actually have this multiplication relationship with Domain Gojo. And then the other tier is going to be the ones which are actually from the same category as the Domain Gojo. And as a result, they are not going to be as good because you will be adding their buff together rather than multiplying them. So that's kind of why I have laid out the supporters in those two tiers. Now I'm going to start off with Yaga, who is I think right now the only one who's able to increase both curse technique and also taijutsu uh, buff right now in the game. So as a result, he kind of gets the first nods when you are wanting to maximize your damage output. And then followed by Toge, who is also going to be universally used when you have Domain Gojo because he will actually allow your domain gojo to be able to use his domain expansion twice and therefore allow you to not just burst the enemy down in one go but actually do it twice. So that's kind of why those two are kind of at the top of the tier because of the how good they are when you use them in conjunction with domain gojo. And then closely followed by those two, I then have the two Kaitos. Now the two Kaitos are also very unique in this game because they are the only ones who are actually able to increase curse technique. Curse energy, and that is actually very, very good when it comes to DPS or buffers who actually need to stack up their buff every single turn, and they all require a lot of curse energy, etc. Right? So that's kind of why they are also once again they are quite irreplaceable because there's literally no other characters or recollections who can do the same thing those two characters are doing. So that's kind of why they are also going to be towards the top of this offensive supporter tier. The only thing is obviously if you actually have Domain Gojo, what typically is going to happen is you will be prioritizing Yaga and Toge in front of your Kaito. So that's kind of why I do have the two Kaitos slightly behind Yaga and Toge here. And out of the two Kaitos, the R one actually I actually think is better than the yellow SSR one, mainly because the R one actually have a more consistent way of increasing cursor energy, whereas the SSR one, whilst it's able to do increase cursor energy, it just doesn't do the job as well as the R version, and instead it's actually able to give a bit of a curse technique buff, but only for yellow characters. So that's kind of why overall I actually still think the R version is more universal use. So that's kind of why I have him in front of the SSR one. So that's basically all of the ones which are able to increase your curse energy, will kind of increase your ultimate energy. And then the last five on this tier are going to be the ones for doing your curse technique or taijutsu technique debuff. And basically what you have here is going to be your yellow Yaga, your Gakuganji, your Ghetto, your green Ghetto, and also your Toge. Now I would basically say if you have any of them, just bring one into a team. Once again, having this multiply effect in terms of how much damage you can do is a lot better than bringing someone else who are just simply adding up the buff together. So that's kind of why they are all as good in their own right. Obviously, Gaku Genji is actually very good when you actually need to debuff the whole team because it's actually an AoE debuff, whereas the other ones are single target. And then you also have the likes of Yoga who actually do the debuff a lot more better for the yellow cat stages. You have Green Ghetto who do a lot better for the green stages. You don't have Blue Toge who do a lot better for the blue stages, etc. And then you have Ghetto who can only do it for curse energy, sorry, curse technique, but not taijutsu technique. So that's kind of what they all have their different roles they need to play. But to be honest, having either one of them on your team is already going to be a lot better than anyone else from the lower tiers that I'm going to talk about later. So that's kind of why they all fall into the second tier here in terms of the offensive supporters. All right, then the next tier is going to be the characters who are still going to be very good from supporting point of view. However, because of the release of Domain Gojo, and they just happen to be in the same grouping as Domain Gojo, if you already bring Domain Gojo, you probably wouldn't bring any of them instead. So that's kind of why immediately they're already worse than the other supporters I've just mentioned. Top of that tier is going to be Domain Megumi. This is probably the closest replacement to Domain Gojo if you don't have him. He's also able to do about 300% debuff to the enemy and therefore allowing you to nuke. The only problem with Domain Gojo, Domain Megumi is that he actually needs to stack up the debuff rather than Domain Gojo, who's able to give you that like 300% for all 3 turns. So that's why Domain Megumi just obviously not going to be as good as Domain Gojo. Then we have Momo. Momo is also very good. A lot of time you actually play Momo at the back because she can actually reach her maximum stacks in just 2 turns. So a lot of times she's actually going to be very, very good as a backup option in your lineup. Then we have Red Mai. Mai is actually very good because she can also do a lot of counter attack, etc. But from a debuffing point of view, like I said, she's just a bit unfortunate that she falls into the same category as Domain Gojo. So that's kind of the reason why she's here. Then we have Nanami and Momo, who are both essentially just a weaker version of Blue Momo. So that's kind of why they are at the end of this tier. Okay, now let's go into the DPS tier. Now the DPS tier, you can see I put a lot of character on this tier. A lot of time it's going to be two colors for each two characters for each color, and that's because I kind of want to point out who is the best DPS when you have Domain Gojo and who's the best DPS when you don't have Domain Gojo. And spoiler alert, a lot of time the best DPS of each color is their colored version of Gojo. So that's kind of why I try to bring at least 2 characters for each color. However, having said that, if you actually take a look at the red one, you can see I actually put 4 characters there. And the reason for this is because right now, both Yuta and Toji are not actually in the limited pool. Sorry, they are not. Sorry, Yuta is a limited character. Toji is not a limited character, but no matter what, both of them are not actually in the standard banner. So as a result, a lot of people don't actually have access to both of them. Instead, what you have is the Nobara and Red Yuji, who, to be honest, I actually think they're just as good as Toji and Yuta. So that's kind of why I just decided I'll put all 4 of them in the same tier for the Red DPS. Now, obviously, if you actually happen to have Toji or Yuta and Max Dupe, I would say, yeah, they're going to be better than Nobara or Yuji. However, if you're actually comparing a Max Dupe Nobara and Yuji versus a Zero Dupe Toji and Yuta, I will actually say they're probably about the same. So that's kind of why, to me, they're all equal. Um, then we come to the blue DPS. We obviously have Blue Gojo, who is the best one if you don't actually have to play Domain Gojo. And then if you do actually want to take advantage of the massive debuff from Domain Gojo, the best blue DPS out there is going to be Jogo. And in fact, he is actually going to get another buff later on as well. So that's kind of why it's definitely worth putting some resources into him if you do want to play him in conjunction with Domain Gojo. And that's obviously if you don't have Sukuna, because Sukuna is obviously the best blue DPS. Okay, so that's the blue DPS options. Then for the green DPS, once again, Hollow Purple Gojo is the best option out there, but you can't play Domain Gojo alongside with him. So instead, as a result, if you do actually want to take advantage of Domain Gojo, Green Megami is going to be the best green DPS out there. So that's kind of what they are here. And then in terms of the yellow ones, I actually have 3. Zhong Yuji is the best one if you don't actually want to play Team Gojo. And in fact, I actually think Zhong Yuji and Team Gojo, if you are just playing them by themselves, they are probably equal in sense of how much damage they can do. However, Zhong Yuji can be played with Domain Gojo, which makes him immediately better if you just want pure nuking yellow DPS. However, Team Gojo still have a bit of a utility usage because he still offer like a debuff and also limitless, so he's have all that damage immunity, etc. So both of them are both going to be very, very good depending on the situation. And then lastly, I have Nanami here. Now, Nanami is not actually a traditional yellow DPS, but the thing I really want to focus on with Nanami is that his ultimate attack and also his skill 3 can do damage regardless of color. So very similar to how Sukuna can be used in all stages regardless of color. Nanami can kind of do that to some extent as well. Obviously not as good, but he can still do it. And on top of that, Nanami does have this gimmick of Black Flash, and there are some stages where you actually need to do consecutive Black Flash in order to weaken the enemy. So that's kind of why I do feel Nanami definitely deserves a massive shout out for the fact that he's able to work even off color, and also for this Black Flash gimmick that he's able to do. So that's kind of why I have him in this tier alongside with all the other DPS. Okay, so this is basically going to be your standard strategy. You bring some supporters, you bring your DPS, you try to burst down the stage. If that doesn't work, normally the next thing you try is actually going to be a Mojito stall strategy, because that is, yes, it takes a long time, but it's very consistent. A lot of times it's not very RNG dependent, and it's just an easy way of knowing that, yes, I can beat the stage for sure if I just spend, 10, 20 minutes here. Obviously, Mahito is going to be the king here, and because he can do damage scaling off the enemy HP rather than based on his own attack, what that basically means is that you can go full defensive rather than bringing any offensive supporters, and you are still able to do decent chunk of damage, and that's basically how all store strategy kind of works. You are requiring Mahito there to actually just wear down the enemy while you do all of your defensive stuff. So that's kind of why Mahito is definitely going to be at the top for the store tier. Then you have Hanami. Hanami is going to be played a lot with Mahito if possible, and that's because Hanami only able to apply huge damage reduction and therefore help you to actually survive the whole time. He also provides a domain expansion which you can use to overwrite your Mahito's own domain expansion, and that basically just accelerate how long it would take for you to actually beat that stage. So a lot of time, if you do have Mahito and the enemy can be debuffed, etc., you normally try to play Mahito and also Hanami together. Okay, then we move on to the counterattacks team, which is normally going to be Todo plus Miwa. And in some cases, maybe also Saki Rindo, although I typically use Saki Rindo for different purpose, which I'll talk about later on. But basically, the idea here is that if the enemy only does single target attack, you will be taunting with Miwa and then you'll be counterattacking with Todo. That basically means you do not take any damage from any single target attack. And when you're doing that, it obviously buys your time for your Mahito to slowly wear down the enemy, etc. So that's kind of why they are also in their own right a viable stall strategy. However, only for single target attack, which is kind of why I'm going to rank them lower than Hanami here. Then the next one we have is gonna be Junpei. Junpei is also very good. If the enemy only have one single boss, regardless whether he does single target attack or AoE attack, if it's only going to be one single boss, what you can do is just basically spam Junpei's skill 1 to just massively debuff and reduce the amount of damage he will do. This is absolutely amazing, and it works for a lot of the higher illusory tower floors. The only thing you have to bear in mind is that this only works for curse technique attacks. So you do have to watch an eye out if the enemy is doing single target. So if the enemy is actually doing physical type of attack or curse technique type of attack before deciding whether Junpei is going to work there. Then you have another version which is very similar to Junpei, which is going to be the SR version of Kaito. And what Kaito does is he offers a buff for curse technique instead, rather than Junpei, which offers a debuff to the enemy. So both of them work very similarly. Junpei is actually able to do a bit more debuff or damage reduction than what SR Kaito is able to do. But in the cases where, for example, there are multiple enemy and therefore you can't just use Junpei single target debuff, then SR Kaito is going to be your best shout because he can actually do an AoE buff to your whole team, which would obviously work regardless whether it's one enemy or two enemy or three enemies, etc. So that's kind of why SR Kaito and Junpei are here. Then the next one I'm going to put out is going to be Red Panda actually. I think I'll put Red Panda right after them. Red Panda does very similar thing to what Junpei does, a single target debuff. However, what's nice about Red Panda's one is actually that it's not just restricted to curse technique attack. It's just a flat damage reduction. Therefore, it can work for both physical and also curse technique, which is going to be great. And on top of that, Red Panda also have a self-taunt and also healing, that kind of thing, which can also make him worthwhile if you need to do, taunt enemy single target attack, etc. So that's kind of why I have Red Panda right after those two. The scaling is not going to be as high as Junpei and SR Kaito, which is why if you know for sure the enemy only does curse technique attack, then obviously they will be better than Red Panda, but Red Panda still have its uses in case the enemy does physical technique. Then the next one is going to be Shoko. Shoko right now is the only healer. I mean, I think that's self-explanatory by itself. A lot of time you would need a healer to actually store out the team. So that's just basically the role of Shoko here. Then we have, I forgot him, Ijichi. Ijichi, he is good in the sense that he can also offer damage increase buff, so like a weaker version for SR Kaito. But what's also nice about him is that he can also do a physical technique buff in case you actually want to do a bit of damage at the same time. But more importantly, his ultimate is actually able to increase the ultimate for your whole team. So by playing him can also potentially, for example, accelerate how fast a Mahito or Han enemy is able to charge up their domain expansion, etc. So that's kind of why you definitely do not want to rule out Ichichi just because he's an R character, because he definitely have his uses depending on the stage. Alright, so that's basically all of the characters which will be helpful into storing out a team, storing out a stage. Then the next tier is going to be the sub DPS. They are basically just going to be the other DPS for each color, which is obviously not going to be as good as the first DPS I talked about. Now for the red color, there isn't anyone left because I already put the two other standard banner good characters there. The only one left is Maki, but Maki is just so bad that I can't even put her in the sub DPS section. So that's kind of why there's no one which from the red faction here. For the blue ones, basically Blue Megami is probably the best one out of the remaining ones, purely for the fact that he's actually able to do a bit of a curse, I think curse technique debuff as well, which obviously also scales with Domain Gojo and all of the other above with like multiplication effect. So that's kind of why Domain Megami, sorry, not Domain Megami, the Blue Megami it's probably the best blue DPS out of the remaining bunch. But blue Nanami and also this SR Virgin Maki can still do their work. And sometimes if the enemy, for example, actually have like a curse technique resistant and force you to bring like a physical attacker, then you definitely would want to use SR Maki or maybe blue Nanami instead in those cases, okay? Then we move on to the green stages. So the green color DPS. This is pretty much all of the remaining green DPS. They're all kind of equal, in my opinion. So you have Yuji, you have Maki, you have Nanami, and you also have Green Nobara. So once again, depending on the situation, you may want to decide what you want to do. Green Nobara is obviously a curse technique. I believe she's curse technique anyway. Maki and Yuji is going to be physical attack, and Nanami does a hybrid attack. So depending on the stages and also whether you need to do an AoE attack, for example, Maki can do AoE attack, Nanami can do AoE attack, you may need to then decide who is actually going to be the best sub DPS to bring out to your team. And then for the yellow ones, I think the only other yellow DPS left remaining is going to be Nobara. So that's kind of why Nobara is just going into the sub DPS tier. Then the next tier is going to be the gimmick tiers. So this is basically characters who normally have something special about them, which is quite unique, and no other characters can replace that. However, they are not normally so useful that you actually want to use them a lot. There may be like one or two random floors in tower mode where they could be useful, and that's kind of why they kind of are just a gimmick you use every now and then, rather than a de facto choice. So starting off with Saki Rindo, so basically she just does damage based on how much HP she already taken, etc. I know for a fact she is actually going to be very crucial in one of the later Illusory Tower floors. I haven't actually looked into that floor too much to understand why Saki Rindo is so good there, but as a result, she can be used for that one single floor, so she kind of falls into this gimmick section. Miguel can weaken the enemy's buff, which is basically a weaker version of what Toji is able to do, because Toji can just just remove it completely, whereas Miguel only weakens it and shortens it, etc. So that's kind of why I have Miguel here. Then we have Blue Yuji. Blue Yuji is normally going to be used for just charging up your ultimate energy for the character behind you. So once again, it's very situational on when you actually want to do it. Kujira did make a video showcase where he actually uses to help Domain Gojo to do 3 domain expansion in one battle. So there are definitely those rare occasions where he could be helpful, but once again, he just used that for one gimmick of increasing ult energy for one ally. So that's basically the usage of him. Then we have this SSR version of Miwa, who in all honesty is not actually as good as just your standard Total plus SR version Miwa store strategy, counterattack store strategy. So that's kind of why I didn't even want to put it on the store team. But if you just kind of want like one single character for counterattack, then yeah, Miwa can do that gimmick as well. Then we have Green SSR Panda. This one is very special. I actually used it a few occasions, mainly for the fact that he can taunt. He has a damage reduction when he taunt, and also he has a second life. And what that basically makes him very useful is that if the enemy is very, very hard hitting on turn 1, you can actually use him to absorb a lot of damage, even if he have to die afterwards. So that's pretty much the only occasion I've used him. The other occasion I think I like, there's one other occasion I use him, which is in floor 21. Uh, Basically, you can use him to uh, taunt all of the enemy attack because they're all single target, and basically as long as he doesn't die, no one else will die. So basically just pair him up with Shoko. So that was back in the days before, for example, Mahito, Hanami, and all of those other OP characters were introduced in standard banner, and he did work in terms of store strategy back in the days. But now with so many other options in the store team, I don't think Green Panda really does much anymore. So that's kind of why the only gimmick I'm gonna give him is the fact that he can actually tank a lot on turn 1 and also have a second life. So therefore he can actually soak up a lot of damage if you really want him to. So that's pretty much the only gimmick I have used him for him. I have used for him now. Then the next one is Sakurindo. Now Sakurindo is a bit special. I could have put her in this store team because she can also do the very cheap taunt, which basically allow you to conserve a lot of curse energy. And on top of that, her combo attack also increase curse energy, which is actually very nice when you combo up with Todo or with Arkaido in order to give your whole team curse energy for the counter attack, etc. So that's kind of what she can definitely be used in the store team. However, a lot of time what I actually kept her as is just kept her as level 1, do a taunt, so she will quickly die and then sub in another character from the back. And because she have literally like the cheapest or the most efficient way of taunting, and unlike Miwa, who when she taunts, she actually have an evasion, which is not very useful if you actually want her to die on turn 1. Literally, this SR version of Sakurindo is the best character for you to sacrifice in order to sub in your backup option. So that's pretty much the best way to utilize him. And for that to happen, obviously you need her to be at very low level, which hopefully a lot of you guys have kept it. But if you guys do, you can definitely try this gimmick out, where you basically just send her to die. Normally Wizard Recollection, which would still be activated even when she leaves the battlefield, and then bring your main actual team member you actually want from the back into the main team. So that's pretty much the gimmick for Sakurindo. And then the last one's gonna be this SR version of Toge. He can do a bit of taunt and also counterattack, so there's definitely a bit of a gimmick there as well. And on top of that, his ultimate attack can also reduce the enemy's ult gauge. So he does have like 2 gimmick whenever you need to use it. I have never actually came into a situation where I need to use them, because if I'm just using one of them, there's normally another option I can do instead. But I could see there may be some stage in the future where you need to use both gimmick in one character, and in that case, SR Toge is going to be your man. So that's kind of why he's going to be here, but at the bottom of the gimmick section, because I just haven't actually had the need to use him yet. And then lastly, the bench characters. They're just really bad characters. Yeah, I'm just gonna keep at that. They're really bad characters. Yellow Nakamura is gonna get buff in the future, in which case then he could actually potentially be playable as a breaker. But in the state he is right now, they're all really bad. Just avoid them at all costs.